Alright, hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. I haven't posted on this channel in a long time, but I thought it'd be a cool idea, as I stated on my Twitter, that to start doing weekly updates on different conflicts in the world. So that's including Ukraine, Sudan, Gaza, Myanmar, Syria, the Sahel region, Somalia, and a bunch of other places. They'll all be time-stamped below, so if you want to skip to the conflict of your choice, you can do that. I'm not too worried about watch time. But let's just start off with Ukraine, as it's the most active conflict right now, the most intense one, and with the one with the most updates. So, looking at the Pokrovsk direction, the most important sector of the front line right now is the Novelski Krasnohorivka salient. So this salient here is a big one that was formed after the Russians broke through near Progress and advanced on the western bank of the Vovcha River. Now, as a result of offensive actions, Russian forces were able to capture the southern portion of the village of Halitsinivka and are now opening up assault operations on Zelane Persha. There are already reports that Russian forces have cleared this village, with some reports saying fighting is taking place in the centre of it, and others reporting just on the northern outskirts. So I'm not too sure about what's kind of happening here right now, but I'd say that the chances are that there's fighting ongoing inside the settlement right now. I'm not too sure if it's been cleared or not, though. That's only one source that said that. However, if this village is cleared and the Russians advanced slightly further south, it will cut off the last remaining supply route to the remaining Ukrainian forces in the salient here. And that's the last paved road, as you can see if we zoom in. That's not it. This one here. This is a paved road which leads back to Jelani Drew here, and then to these other villages and towns around here, and then leads to the rear. So that's the main route for resupplyment for Ukrainian groupings in the salient, and it appears the Russians are about to cut it. Now that would explain why the Russians recently advanced north of Krasnohorivka, capturing the northern part of the town. There are reports already coming in that Russian forces have reached the westernmost outskirts of Krasnohorivka. One report stated that they'd captured all of the town except for the western outskirts where there were no Ukrainians present. However, geolocated footage does show that the northern part over here, this northern residential area, has been captured, including the last section of the pre-war defensive line, which was just here. I don't know if you can see it, but yeah, there's a few little fortifications here. Those are the last ones following the fall of those fortifications near Toretsk. So the Russians likely took advantage of their control over the high ground over here and advanced in this direction further to the west, and also probably conducted simultaneous attacks across this bridge here, if I had to guess. They don't have to worry too much about the Ukrainians though, because the Ukrainians likely withdrew without a fight before the Russians even advanced here, just based on reports. There are also reports that Russian forces have captured all of Novelskaya and are also advancing across this entire salient, with Ukrainians withdrawing bit by bit each day. Now, looking at the situation in the town of Ukrainsk, Russian forces were recently able to break through to the south of this town, but before we look into that, let's take a look at what happened to the north leading up to this breakthrough, or localized breakthrough, I should say. So, the Russians, following the fall of Memrik, advanced quickly down this tree line here, and to these tree lines over here, and advanced to the northern outskirts of Ukrainsk. Now, civilians in the city reported heavy machine gun fire and tanks operating in the area, indicating that fighting was very, very close to the northern outskirts of the town. Some Russian sources initially claimed that Russian forces had advanced to Parahova Street and were now attempting to attack the three-story buildings over here. However, that was never confirmed, and none of the reliable sources that I use had reported on it, so I left it as under Ukrainian control. And then a few days later, reports emerged and footage emerged showing Ukrainian forces in full control of the town, indicating that the initial Russian storming attempts had failed. However, during this time, the Russians were focusing on consolidating control over their positions to the north, near Memrik, and to the north of Ukrainsk, and were also slowly grinding through the Ukrainian defences in Dolinivka and Halitsinivka. This led to an eventual Russian localized breakthrough to the south, allowing them to advance down these tree lines here to the forested areas and these gullies in the lowlands, and advanced up them towards the southern outskirts of Lysivka and Ukrainsk. So, The Russians had already entered Lysivka from the north reportedly, and the Ukrainians reportedly withdrew from the central part of the village across these open fields to the high-rise buildings in the easternmost part of Ukrainsk. However, there are still reports of Ukrainian positions in the southern part, while this part here was in a grey zone. So the Russians, instead of storming it directly from the north, from their positions in the north, they decided on attacking around here, as this served two purposes. One, to get behind Ukrainsk, and two, to get right up and under Lysivka, which would then allow them to storm Ukrainsk from another direction, the east, once this village fell. So that's what they did. They tried to encircle it on three sides, from the north, the east, and the south, and they were pretty successful in doing that. The forests in the south, the way they're laid out, does make it easy for the Russians to attack Ukrainsk. As you can see, once the Russians were able to advance from the south here, along these tree lines, they were able to advance up these, which led directly to the southernmost arches. Now, these trees are important as they conceal the Russian infantry as they advance up them, preventing Ukrainian FPV drone operators and artillery crews from spotting them in time. And by the time that they spot them, they've reached the southern outskirts of Ukrainsk and have begun assaulting the southern part of the town. And this seemed to work pretty well for the Russians, as within a day of this localized breakthrough, Russian forces had already captured a section of the dachas and the garages here, and had occupied the first four high-rise buildings, the five-story buildings. And a couple hours later, fighting was already being reported in the area of the school number, I believe 13, I believe that is. However, there's no confirmation of any Russian positions being established here. As for the situation near Hernik, there were reportedly failed Russian assaults on the northern part of the town. However, Deep State has moved the grey zone into these first houses here, indicating that fighting is ongoing nearby. There are also reports that Ukrainian forces have been encircled in this defensive fortification here. That just came out today, so the Russians likely would have captured this forested area here and advanced to the Vovcha River. And the way the Vovcha River bends here creates I guess a natural salient that the Russians are able to exploit by advancing behind it and cutting it at this point here. And that allows the Russians to cut off the Ukrainians from supply unless they're able to cross the river to Zhelany Dru here. Now, another important factor in the Battle of Ukrainsk is this giant Terikon here. Now, Terikon, in case you don't know, is a big industrial waste heap, so when you dig things out of the ground, you have to dump it somewhere, and they are dumped in these massive Terikons, and they dot the Donbass, essentially. And this is one of them here, and you can see you got the mine here too, the Ukrainsk mine, and the Ukrainians have full control over this Terikon as the time of saying this, and this is important as it allows them to have full fire control over pretty much the entire town, and the northern approaches to it. So this means that they're able to spot the Russian groupings and count attacks, as they have full surveillance, and also have fire control over any potential Russian attacks, let's say for example in the stadium here. As for the situation in Solidavyr, there were previous reports that Russian forces had captured the Solidavyr City Central Hospital. However, a couple of days later, reports came in of a Ukrainian counterattack from the southern micro-district here, recapturing this whole southeastern residential area. There are also reports that Ukrainian forces counterattacked from positions near the city park and captured the northeastern residential area and the fire station. Now, previously, Ukrainian forces had likely withdrawn to the high-rise buildings in the city centre, and were repelling small Russian attacks of 3 to 5 soldiers in the area of the city park in the direction of the 3-story buildings, the residential buildings here. And they withdraw relatively quickly to this area because there are already reports of Russian groupings operating freely around the Solona River on this, I believe it was Mihailivska Street, but I could be wrong. Anyways, my point is that the Ukrainians withdrew to these high-rise buildings without putting up much resistance. There was a bit of fighting on this street here, but apart from that, they largely withdrew. And this was so they could wait for Ukrainian reinforcements in the form of the 72nd Mechanized Brigade, which was sent from Volodar, which we'll talk about later, and the 15th Operational Recognition Brigade, which arrived from their replenishment in Ternopil, which is just up here in the far west of Ukraine. This reportedly allowed them to counterattack and recapture the whole eastern part of the town, pushing the Russians to the Selidovskaya mine, to this Terikon here. And looking at the situation in Novofrodivka, the Russians were able to advance and occupy the cemetery, taking up positions in the trees on this road here. And they were also able to capture the final Terikon. Actually, no, not the final, sorry, there is a Terikon over here too. But they were able to capture this Terikon and this forest plantations to the north. In Florivka, Russian forces, geolocated footage from today shows that Russian forces advanced up the main street, capturing the Ukrainian machine gun position at the local school, and advancing towards the town centre. Most of the town centre is now under their control, with the Ukrainian forces likely withdrawing to the western bank of the Zhuravka River. There are already reports that Russian forces have captured the whole town, although those are not reliable and have not been confirmed right now. This advance also indicates that Russian forces have advanced further up these tree lines towards the Novotoretsky Gully. Anyways, let's move to Kursk, where there's a few updates that I can give you. So, firstly, there was a large Ukrainian advance in the Malaya Lokna area. Previously, there were heavy battles occurring in this village here, especially for the women's colony. The Ukrainian forces, with tank support, were advancing up the high ground near these gullies here, up this road towards the railway line, and they were doing this to try and cut off the Russians from the north and encircle them inside the central part of the village. The Russians are able to counterattack and recapture this section here, however the Ukrainians then attacked again, and the Russians counterattacked again, and it went back and forth a couple of times, based on reports, and eventually the Russian garrison was forced to withdraw after nearly being encircled, and this essentially created a chain reaction of events that allowed the Ukrainians to attack towards Novaya Sorchina, Orlovka, Pogribki, Mariivka, and are now attacking Hitrovka. And the Ukrainians have already established positions in the southernmost houses of this settlement here. There were also advances on Naidinov, allowing the Ukrainians to capture the settlement, and essentially closing this whole big salient that was formed from the original Ukrainian spearhead attack towards Kolchok and the other one near Ruskoye Poroshenye. And there was also another small Ukrainian advance on Nizhnaya Paravaya. I probably pronounced that horribly, but you get what I mean. They were able to advance into the southern part of this village here, this hamlet I guess you could call it. It's very small, on the northern bank of the Sucha River. And a small advance was also made in these forest plantations on in the lowland, and they were able to cross the railway line and establish positions on the eastern side of the tracks. And the Russians, on the other hand, responded by launching a counterattack in the Koronevo area. So following reports of heavy fighting in this area, the Russians were able to mount a counterattack by recapturing the Ukrainian positions on the southern bank of this reservoir, and were also able to advance down the Sucha to Koronevo road, additionally capturing a gas station and this tree line here. Anyway, that's all the updates from Kursk. Not too much has changed except for the main Ukrainian advance here. We've got no news in the border areas in Belgorod. Let's move to Toretsk, where there's a few updates here. So in Toretsk, there's differing reports on the situation in New York. So previously, Ukrainian forces advanced into New York. Well, this is one report, I guess. There was a report saying that they advanced from their positions in Nelipivka to the phenol plant in the central part of the town, and were able to recapture it. Another source stated that Russian forces still hold a small position in these buildings here, and other sources claim that Ukrainian forces never left the phenol plant and were besieged, and that Ukrainian forces, I believe Azov forces, were able to advance from Lelopivka and recapture the approaches to the phenol plant, allowing for a controlled withdrawal from the besieged Ukrainian troops there. So there are also reports that Ukrainian forces have recaptured this section of Nelipivka here, and other reports indicating that Russian forces have advanced over the Zalizna River, capturing the hospital here. Really, it's impossible to know what's happening here. New York is a mess right now. There are so many different reports, so I won't make a conclusion as of now, because it will probably be wrong, but I'll update you next week and on my Twitter as events unfold. In Druzhba, Russian forces have likely captured the whole settlement now. There was geolocated footage showing that they had captured this last main residential area here. However, it's possible that Ukrainian forces still maintain limited positions along these streets here. And Russian forces reportedly entered the Novaya mine in Toretsk, which is just over here, and have also likely marginally advanced towards the city centre, capturing the hospital here. There are additional reports that Russian forces advanced to the school here, capturing this high-rise building, likely advancing along the main street and then branching off into the residential buildings. In the Chasiv Yar in Bakhmut sector, Russian forces made a random kind of, I guess, not really a breakthrough, but a random advance from Klishchiivka towards the Seversky Donetsk Canal, pushing the Ukrainian forces to the western bank of it. Now this area is on an important height as it allows for full surveillance over the southern part near Andreevka, and will also allow for further advances towards the forests southwest of Ivanivsky. So the Russians are able to capture the remaining forested areas on the heights behind Klishchiivka, and were also able to capture these tree lines, with some reports indicating that Russian forces have already advanced south and may be attempting to cut off Andreevka. This advance also means that they captured the, I believe it's the Tetris fortification, which is around here. It's not on the map, unfortunately, but it is around the intersection of these two tree lines, I believe. And there are also reports that Russian forces captured all of Kalinivka. However, the geolocated footage shows that they've only managed to establish a small foothold on the western bank of the Seversky Donetsk Canal, capturing, I believe, the pumping station and also a couple of the buildings here. Moving further north, Russian forces likely captured half of Parizhne, advancing up the railway line and forcing a Ukrainian withdrawal from the southern part here towards Fedorivka. The post office has also likely been captured, with Ukrainian groupings mounting a defence in the northern part. In Kherson, some interesting developments came out today, showing that Russian forces had made a large advance of over 41 square kilometers in the southern islands in the Dnieper River Delta. So they were able to capture these big islands over here, and also managed to capture the remaining part of this island here. There's also footage showing Russian marines on the western bank of the river over here. However, it is not known whether they have established positions here yet. But what we do know is that they're storming Ukrainian positions, limited positions in this area here, and may be attempting to attack Berehove on the western bank of the Dnieper River. It's unknown right now, though. On the southern Donetsk front, there's quite a few changes to cover. So Russian forces were able to advance from Shevchenko, and I'll go through how they did this. So, using these forested areas here, they were able to advance up the forested area, roughly, I believe it was 10 vehicles, 10 armoured vehicles, advanced up here, to this road here, advanced along here and across these fields, and then they assaulted the intersection between these four tree lines here. A few of them split off and provided suppressive fire on Ukrainian positions here, while the rest of them stormed north of it to the other Ukrainian positions along these tree lines here. They're running north to south. Russian infantry likely dismounted and cleared the tree line from east to west, so west to east, while Russian forces were able to capture all the tree lines south of the, I forget the name of this river always, Kashlahach River. This eventually led to an assault on Prichystavka, with Russian forces moving without much resistance in the eastern part of the village. The Ukrainians fired an artillery shell at Russian forces, but it missed the vehicle that it was targeting. Fighting ensued in the central part of the village. However, a day later, a video showed a Russian flag raised in one of these houses on the western outskirts of Prichystavka. And there were already reports of clearing operations in Zolotoneva, indicating that Russian forces have closed the salient formed north of Novomayersky. As for the situation in Volodar, I don't know why there's a gap here. That's better. Russian forces likely entered the southern outskirts of Vladimir in these houses here, with assault operations ongoing on the southern Darches. Additionally, Russian forces are attempting to advance to the main part of Vladimir along these tree lines here, and fighting is taking place in the Pivdeno-Donbaska mine. There are reports that Russian forces control half of it. Some sources claim they control all of it. However, the geolocated footage shows that Russian forces have captured all the tree lines back here and are assaulting the easternmost buildings of it. The situation in Volodar is very bad for Ukraine right now. The Russians over here are likely trying to get to Velika Novoselka, which is a major logistical hub for Ukraine. However, the Russians near Vodene are likely trying to take the main Tarikon here, which is the commanding heights in the area, and allows them to have fire control over the approaches to Volodar. And I've already talked about what fire control does earlier on in the video, with the Ukraine's Tarikon. Anyways, if the Russians are able to capture this Tarikon, then they will be able to advance down the 00532 road with much more ease, and will also attempt to storm Volodar from the south. Speaking of storming Volodar from the south, there are reports that Russian forces have captured the Volodar hospital, although those remain unconfirmed and unlikely in my opinion, as there has been no evidence and very few sources reporting on it. As for the situation in Vovchansk, positional combat continues with reports of limited Russian counterattacks inside the citadel, and a Ukrainian tank was destroyed by a Russian FPV drone in the south of the town. In the Lipsy direction, positional combat continues without any changes. In the Kupiansk direction, Russian forces advanced northwest of Pishtine, capturing these forested areas and these tree lines here, attempting to take control of the commanding heights in the area, possibly an attempt to get behind the Ukrainian positions in the forested areas near Tabaivka, without having to go and fighting an uphill battle over here, which is reportedly, well, appears to be more heavily fortified. As the main fortifications here have fallen, the Russians will be able to advance with much more ease to the north to these tree lines here, and will probably try to expand the flanks to prevent against Ukrainian counterattacks and to make resupplyment easier. Russian forces have also likely advanced in a pincer movement along each of these forested areas here, and have also likely advanced along the Pishchina River towards Kolesinkivka. And in Sinkievka, I haven't marked on the map yet, but Russian forces have captured the southern part of the village, and there are already reports of ongoing assault operations in this tree line here, with the likely goal of reaching Petropavlivka, which cuts the highway resupplying Ukrainian forces on the eastern bank of the Oskil River. This will also allow for Russian assault operations on Kupiansk itself. And geolocator footage shows that Russian forces made a small advance in the forests here, and advanced down the railway line, capturing a series of positions in the forest. With no news from the Liman or Svatove sectors. In Siversk, Russian forces advanced near Bilohorivka. I don't know why it's taking so long to load, by the way, and have managed to take control over some buildings here on the northern outskirts of the village, and also captured the Ukrainian positions in these trees here. We've got no news from the Orikhiv area. And finally, in Velika Novoselka, Russian forces have likely advanced north of Vorozhine and captured a Ukrainian trench fortification north of the village, near these tree lines here. Now let's look at some of the Russian missile and drone strikes. Now I won't cover all of them, but just the primary ones that have occurred over the past week. So on the 2nd of September, Russian forces launched a large-scale missile strike involving Kh-101 missiles launched from Tu-95 MS bombers from Saratov Oblast of Russia, Iskander ballistic missiles launched from Kursk Oblast, and Kn-2325 ballistic missiles also launched from Kursk Oblast. The Kh-101 missiles targeted Kyiv city, with impacts being caught on video in multiple instances. Kn-2325 and Iskander ballistic missiles also targeted Kyiv, while an Iskander struck Kharkiv city too. Explosions were reported on both instances. 23 Geran-2 drones were launched, mostly at Kyiv, and the Ukrainian Air Force claimed that Ukrainian air defense shot down 20 out of 23 Geran drones and all 14 Kh-101 cruise missiles. They also claimed that 9 out of 6 Kn-23 and Iskander-M ballistic missiles were shot down, and 0 out of 1 missiles of an unknown type were shot down. The fall of missile debris was recorded on the Holosivsky district, Svatio-Shinitsky, I pronounced that horribly, Dnipro and Shevchenkov districts of Kyiv, while the mayor of Kyiv stated that medics were called to 3 different districts in the city. 2 people were wounded, one of which was hospitalized. In Kharkiv, a missile reportedly struck some darches in an unspecified part of the city. No casualties were reported. Looking at other missile strikes too, Russian Iskander ballistic missiles were launched at Poltava. They reportedly struck an educational facility and hospital, killing 51 people and wounding over 200 others. Russian sources claim that it was targeting Western military trainers who were planning to train Ukrainian soldiers. One Iskander-M was launched at Voznesensk. In Mykolaiv Oblast, it likely hit its target as explosions were reported in the city. At least 5 S-300 missiles were launched at Pokrovsk and Donetsk Oblast, with none of them being intercepted due to the lack of Ukrainian air defense in Donetsk Oblast. They were targeting a bridge leading into the city, which will likely affect Ukrainian logistics in the Pokrovsk direction. A Kh-59 missile was launched from Bryansk Oblast and struck an unknown target in Chernihiv. An explosion was reported in the suburbs of the city. 5 Iskander-M/Kn-23 ballistic missiles were launched one after another at Pavlohrad and Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. They all reached their targets. The Dnipropetrovsk Oblast Military Administration head reported that Russian strikes in Pavlohrad damaged residential areas and injured upwards of 61 people. Based on the images, the missiles did not directly hit the residential buildings. It appears that they were caught in the blast radius. As for Ukrainian missile and drone strikes, Ukraine launched another barrage of MLRS rockets at Belgorod. Cars and homes caught fire, and a kindergarten was heavily damaged, likely the result of falling debris. This is for two reasons: as one, Russian air defense is very strong in Belgorod, and most of them are intercepted, and two, the damage to these structures was not severe enough, in my opinion, to be from a direct hit. Ukraine carried out a UAV attack on a Russian ammunition depot in Voronezh Oblast. As a result, a massive fire broke out, resulting in most of the village of Sodatskoye burning down. Local authorities evacuated several nearby villages, and no injuries were reported. In other news, Iran sent missiles to Russia. Iran reportedly sent Fateh 360 short-range ballistic missiles and Ababil close-range ballistic missiles to Russia. These don't mean too much. I mean, Russia already has a decent-sized stock of Iskander missiles, and they have got North Korean missiles too. The main issue with this is it's a step in the right direction for Russia in getting the long-range missiles. Now, if the long-range missiles are sent, then it'll be very bad for Ukraine, as just think about it like this. Every time a MiG-31K takes off, an air raid alert is declared in every region of Ukraine. Now, that happens maybe once every 2 days. Every time Iskander missile launches are active, this doesn't always mean it's a strike, by the way, there are air raid alerts in a few regions of Ukraine. Iskander missiles are active maybe, 8 to 10 times a day. So this means that if these long-range missiles are sent, it'll be like a MiG-31K taking off 8 to 10 times per day, with air raid alerts happening every, let's just say, 2 to 3 hours in every single region of Ukraine. Plus the Iskander missiles, plus general other missile strikes. Yeah, it'll be very, very bad, and a lot of sleepless nights for civilians, which will definitely degrade morale amongst the public. Anyways, moving away from Ukraine, let's go to the Israel-Gaza and Hezbollah conflict. So looking at the situation on the northern border of Israel with Hezbollah, Israeli airstrikes continue to be carried out on southern Lebanon. Among these strikes was a precision strike on a car in southwestern Lebanon near the city of Naqoura. The two occupants who were reportedly a part of Hezbollah were both killed. Hezbollah conducted 83 strikes in northern Israel over the past week, a relatively large increase from the last few weeks, except for obviously the time when they launched 300 missiles at once. 3 people were injured after an anti-tank missile was launched from Lebanon. They were all treated at the Safed hospital. Fighters of the Islamic Resistance in Iraq launched a squadron of kamikaze drones at the Israeli port of Haifa. They were intercepted near the border between Israel and Jordan. Looking at the situation in Gaza, let's go from south to north. So in Rafah, there is a continued risk of encirclement of Hamas and Tel Sultan, and there are reports that Hamas fighters are increasingly using underground tunnels to evacuate to the humanitarian area near Al-Mawasi. A large area of Hamas's Rafah battalion does appear to be about to be encircled, if not already being encircled, inside these two densely populated districts of Rafah. The Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade and Hamas mortared Israeli forces east of Rafah city 3 times in the past week, while other Palestinian militias mortared Israeli forces near the Salah al-Din Gate east of Rafah city. As for the situation in central Gaza, the IDF Air Force conducted an airstrike on Deir al-Balah, targeting Hamas command and control centers. The IDF reported that the airstrike killed 2 Palestinian Islamic Jihad battalion commanders. Following the reports of the IDF completing their clearing operations in eastern Deir al-Balah and Khan Yunis, and reports by local Palestinian journalists that Israeli forces were conducting a slow withdrawal from the eastern Deir al-Balah, a 3-day humanitarian pause in central Gaza was announced. Humanitarian aid groups administered polio vaccines to Gazan children during 9-hour-long humanitarian pauses over the course of 3 days. Now, these have finished now and are reportedly moving to Rafah. It is important to note that the Israeli Prime Minister's office has emphasized that the pause is not related to the long-term ceasefire proposal currently under discussion in Doha. And in the Gaza City area, Palestinian residents told Reuters that Israeli tanks have been operating in the Zaytun district in southern Gaza City, which is over here. The IDF reportedly blew up several houses in the area. Hamas reportedly launched one rocket at a grouping of Israeli troops in the Netzarim corridor, and local Palestinian sources reported that small arms fire and shelling south of Gaza City and along the Netzarim corridor continued, indicating that Israeli clearing operations may still be continuing. The IDF stated that it conducted an airstrike targeting a Hamas compound south of the Daraj neighborhood in Gaza City, killing 8 Hamas fighters from the Daraj and Al-Tufa battalion and the commander of the Daraj Tufa battalion's Nukba SOF company. Hamas rocket attacks have decreased over the past few weeks. Israeli media reported that this decrease is due to the IDF beginning to immediately evacuate Gazan residents in areas from which rockets are fired and then demolishing the buildings in the area. The Institute for the Study of War reported that the decrease is also likely due to Hamas stockpiles of rockets dwindling. The Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade conducted one rocket and one mortar attack on Israeli forces around the Netzarim corridor on September 7th. As for the situation in the West Bank, the IDF finally withdrew from Jenin, from the city of Jenin, which is over here in the north of the West Bank, after 10 days of military operations in the city. But anonymous security officials told Israeli army radio correspondents that Israeli forces will return to Jenin soon and that Operation Summer Camps is not over. The IDF also announced that on September 6th that it had killed Hamas's Jenin commander. However, Hamas has not confirmed the statement yet. Hamas stated that Israeli forces have killed at least 30 Palestinian fighters in the West Bank since August 28th, which is when the operations began. An airstrike was conducted on Palestinian fighters who had thrown explosives at IDF troops in Jenin. An airstrike was also carried out on Palestinian fighters that engaged Israeli forces with small arms fire in Tulkarm. 2 Palestinian fighters were also killed during the small arms battles. The IDF conducted 3 drone strikes on 2 buses, which reportedly killed at least 5 Palestinian Islamic Jihad fighters. Several Palestinian militias acknowledged the deaths of the PRG fighters. Moving to the situation in the Red Sea, the UK Office of Maritime Trade Operations reported 2 Houthi attacks on commercial vessels operating in the southern Red Sea. The first reportedly occurred around 70 nautical miles off the coast of Salif in western Yemen, where a ship was hit by 2 unknown projectiles. The ship was damaged as a result, but no casualties were reported, and the ship continued on its journey. Then, just 5 hours later, a second attack was carried out on roughly 58 nautical miles from the coast of Hudaida in western Yemen. An aerial attack drone was reportedly used, this time resulting in minor damage and no casualties. Over the last week, the US Navy reportedly intercepted 3 Houthi UAVs and 1 uncrewed boat. Moving to the situation in Sudan, the war in Sudan has now lasted for over 500 days and has become the worst humanitarian crisis since the Darfur War. Now let's take a look at the Sennar salient. So after a major push by the RSF, their offensive has largely stalled due to the rainy season beginning in the Sahel. Massive floods have occurred in Sudan, killing hundreds of people. This is also reportedly occurring due to the strengthening of SAF positions in the area. The SAF is now responding by conducting constant shelling on the settlements under RSF control in the Sennar salient, while counterattacks were reportedly carried out on the flanks. It is unknown whether or not these were successful. We have no news on the Blue Nile or Al Jazeera states. In Al Fashur, which is besieged by the way, the RSF reportedly carried out a ground attack in an unspecified part of the city, but failed to gain any ground. RSF artillery strikes hit multiple markets, reportedly killing several civilians. But apart from that, there's not much news from Sudan this week. However, as the rainy season comes towards an end, we'll likely see an increase in the intensity of the fighting. Moving to the situation in Myanmar, just to let you guys know, this map was not made by me, the other 3 were, but this map is made by Myanmar War Map on Twitter. The link to their account will be posted in the description below. So firstly, let's have a look at the Rakhine state. Battle occurred on the Tung Yup to Padang Road, which is this road that leads from here to here, towards the Bago region. This battle indicates that the junta is still trying to resupply the besieged troops in Tung Yup city and provide reinforcements to them. We have no news in the Saigon region. In the Shan state, fierce fighting broke out between TNLA rebels and junta forces near the village of Yaewin, which by the way is just over here in the Shan state. One local woman stated that there was a fierce battle in an agricultural park near the village, and since about 3 AM they had heard heavy gunfire. Another local reported that there was fighting ongoing near the local police station. TNLA, DPIA and PDF rebels continue to attack the 902 Artillery Command base near Tonghakam, which is over here. It is unknown whether these assaults were successful or not, but if the Battalion 354 base is captured, which is, I believe, this one here, yep, this one right here, it will complete the defeat of the 902 Artillery Command. Fighting in the Kachin state, fighting between KIA and junta forces was reported in the ward near the Hippocant prison. At least 4 junta bases are still in operation there, but all of them are under siege after KIA forces took control of the surrounding hills and commanding heights. We have no news in the Mandalay region. In Magway state, the PDF reportedly attacked a junta military council camp in the village of Myaiklo, which is right down here. A PDF spokesperson stated that around 100 junta soldiers were attacked at the monastery near the airfield down here, so I'm assuming it's this monastery right here. The battles lasted an hour and reportedly resulted in the deaths of 9 junta soldiers, with 6 others being severely wounded. According to a PDF commander, 2 PDF fighters were wounded in the operation, forcing them to retreat. Moving to the situation in Syria. By the way, this map was also not made by me, it was made by Syriac Maps on Twitter. I will leave the link to their account in the description below. So firstly, starting off with the situation in the Deir ez-Zor desert. Local Syrian media reported that Israel likely conducted a drone strike targeting an Iranian-backed militia vehicle. The strike reportedly killed the occupants and killed or injured several civilians in the vicinity of the truck. This is currently unconfirmed, but Israel has conducted strikes on Syria in the past. In the Aleppo area, footage shows HTS rebels launching a counterattack on the West Aleppo front. They made a small advance and seized control over a forward position. 2 government soldiers were captured as a result. Yesterday, clashes broke out between the Manbij military council and Turkish-backed factions, following an infiltration operation by the latter on military checkpoints in the frontline village of Mosinli in the Manbij countryside, east of Aleppo. However, so far no casualties have been reported. This comes as pro-Turkish factions fired heavy artillery shells at the Manbij military council positions in Al-Tukar village, which is 17.6 kilometers northwest of Mosinli village. So Mosinli village is down here, and Al-Tukar village is up here. The Manbij military council responded by targeting a Turkish post in the Tukar al-Sahir village in the Euphrates Shield area, so that village is over here. In the Idlib area, Russian forces continue to shell the vicinities of several villages in the Idlib countryside and conduct airstrikes on HTS positions. And a situation with ISIS in the Syrian desert. There's quite a bit of news over the past week. On September 5th, 7 Syrian government soldiers were killed in an armed attack carried out by ISIS in the Ethera area of the Hamar countryside. So that's over here. This comes as ISIS intensifies their operations against government forces positions in the Syrian desert. These new fatalities bring the total number of fatalities in military operations in the Syrian desert since early 2024 to 515. The next day, the Russian and Syrian air forces conducted joint strikes on ISIS positions in the Syrian desert. It is reported that several motorcycles and vehicles equipped with large caliber machine guns were destroyed. It is possible that this was in response to the attacks on the Syrian government soldiers, although that is not confirmed. Shortly afterwards, Syrian government ground units supported by Russian aviation conducted combing operations in the Syrian desert. ISIS hideouts were discovered south of the town of Palmyra, and small arms clashes broke out. And in the situation in the Kurdish-controlled areas, Turkish forces conducted a drone strike on the outskirts of Kamishli, which is over here. As a result, an SDF commander was killed. Moving to the situation in the Sahel, this map was also made by Syriac Maps. We have no news from Mali. In Burkina Faso, over the past week, the village of Kulpelogo has been attacked daily by Janum fighters. Kulpelogo, by the way, is just in the southern part of Burkina Faso, right here. More than 10 VDP were killed. VDP, also known as the Volunteers of Defense of the Homeland, is an armed self-defense group created to fight jihadist insurgents, and is also allied with the Burkina Faso armed forces. And in Niger, on September 1st, a Niger armed group convoy was ambushed by 10 ISIS fighters. As many as 20 soldiers were killed, with another 10 now missing. The exchange of fire was reportedly very violent, and the convoy was partially set on fire and looted. Several 4x4 vehicles were stolen, as well as a large quantity of weapons and ammunition. We've got no news in the Central African area, which includes the DRC and the Central African Republic. Moving to the situation in Somalia, this map is made by Aga Kakulan. I probably pronounced that horribly, but that's their name on Twitter. I will link it in the description too. So military sources stated that Allied forces have bombarded Al-Shabaab hideouts in the middle Shabelle and Galgaduud regions, which are over here by the way, near Mogadishu. The strikes reportedly killed 7 militants, and according to the sources, the forces shelled Al-Shabaab bases in Runugud and El Hidur district in coordinated offensives against the militants. Al-Shabaab shelled an encampment of US troops at the Baladogle airfield, and a state-run source reported that a series of airstrikes conducted Al-Shabaab fighters in the Runegud and Kildahur districts spanning the Middle Shabelle and Galgaduud regions. Multiple hideouts were reportedly targeted, with significant casualties being reported along with vehicle losses. Now, Al-Shabaab shelled an encampment of US troops at the Baladogle airfield, and skirmishes were reported outside Bulu Jaji when Somali armed forces on patrol came under attack from Al-Shabaab fighters. This comes as clashes were reported in a checkpoint near the Bulu Jaji bridge following an attack by Al-Shabaab fighters. Now, Bulu Jaji is just over here in the southern part of the country, and the bridge they're talking about is likely this bridge, which apparently isn't on the map. It's obviously destroyed already. As for the situation in Nigeria, on September 1st at around 4 PM, it was reported that nearly 150 heavily armed fighters from Boko Haram attacked the village of Mafa and the surrounding settlements. So Mafa is up here in the northeastern part of Nigeria, just here. It is reported that as many as 127 civilians were killed. Homes and businesses were also reportedly looted and burned. Boko Haram is said to have attacked the village in retaliation for the execution of 2 of its fighters by the village militias a few days earlier. In Yemen, in response to an attack on an oil tanker last week by Ansar Allah fighters, the US Air Force conducted airstrikes on ground observation stations and launches in the west of Yemen. This map is also by Syriac, by the way. In Libya, 2 people have died and 3 others were injured in armed clashes that broke out in the Al-Qums city east of the capital Tripoli. It's over here. The Joint Health Room in Al-Qums municipality declared a state of emergency following the early morning clashes. In Afghanistan, the NRF, which is also known as the National Resistance Front, claimed to have killed 13 Taliban soldiers and wounded 6 in a period from September 2nd to September 5th. These attacks were reportedly carried out in the Herat and Taha provinces. According to an NRF statement, the latest attack occurred yesterday in Taloqan, the capital city of Taha, killing 3 Taliban intelligence agents and wounding another. They claimed that their fighters suffered no harm during these operations. This comes as in recent months armed opposition groups have intensified their guerrilla attacks against the Taliban across several provinces, including in the capital city of Kabul. And finally in Iraq, in western Iraq, local security forces, supported by US forces, raided ISIS positions. They met ISIS members armed with explosive belts. It was reported that 15 ISIS fighters were killed. In northern Iraq, Turkish aviation conducted airstrikes on Kurdistan Workers' Party positions near the town of Matina. Up to 20 unspecified objects were hit. Meanwhile, according to Reuters, the United States and Iraq have agreed to withdraw US troops from Iraq by 2026. This deal would apparently see hundreds of troops leave by September 2025, with the remainder departing by the end of 2026. The Foreign Affairs Advisor to the Iraqi Prime Minister stated that we are now on the brink of transitioning to the relationship between Iraq and members of the international coalition to a new level, focusing on bilateral relations in military, security, economic and cultural areas. However, he did not comment on the details of the plans. Anyways, that's it for this week's update on every conflict in the world. If you did enjoy, consider dropping a like and subscribing. I'm not here to force you, but it does help the channel more than you'd expect. Also follow me on Twitter and my Telegram, links will be in the description. I'm assuming most of you guys came from there, so that doesn't really change anything, but if you aren't following me there, then go do that. Anyways, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week in another video. Goodbye.